If I were to deny it, I would need to explain that to my state superintendent. He would want to know why, and I would make that public.
Okay.
Any state superintendent, I have a good relationship with the current one, but any state superintendent is going to assume that the regional superintendent knows the communities better.
Sure.
So he follows, you'll see in a minute, he follows the same, he or she would follow the same sort of criteria that I do, but I would have an opinion that I would write why. Now,
just a follow-up question with that,
sure,
if I may.
Absolutely.
With your due diligence, and there was some step that was missed or omitted or some criteria that you felt wasn't met.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your response for denial, could then it be another petition be submitted again to correct what you may have found?
So I'm going to give you two answers for that too. Okay. That's all right. So I would tell you that if there was a group working on a petition, I would be willing to look at process. I'm not going to give an opinion on content,
Okay.
but I could say if it was submitted to me in a draft to review, I would rather do that and say, you know what, you left out the
Okay.
teacher's contract. Something's missing here.
Okay, here it is.
So I would offer that if somebody was going into this 2 to 3 year process, I would say I would be willing to look at a draft to see if there's a piece missing
Okay.
without commenting on content.
All right, good.
The second answer to the second question is that you'll see in a minute, if it's denied by the state superintendent, or if it doesn't pass with the vote, another petition may not be submitted for 2 years.
Okay.
And then after 2 years, another one could be submitted. So there is a timeline. That's the second part of the question. Yes.
Could the state superintendent override your decision? Say you deny it, could he approve it?
Yep. Yep.
Or vice
Absolutely.
versa?
Right. He really has the final say. And I think that's a good checks and balance. I mean, it sounds very American to me, right? that there's a sequence that involves steps, gets a different set of eyes, and it's not hard to imagine that a state superintendent who's looking at 852 districts has a little bit different lens than me and my 41. But yes, so you'll see I submit it to the state superintendent. He then has 3 weeks to review. He will be reviewing, I would submit to him the entire record. So he would have the audio record, he'd have the transcription, in addition to the petition and my individual finding. So he would have all those pieces, and the law affords him 3 weeks to make his decision. Once he makes his decision, if he denies the petition, it dies there for 2 weeks or 2 years. If he approves it, then the petition has already said when they think that's going to be on the next election. That's part of the requirement that you substantiate when you think it would go to election. So you'll see it almost looks like a repeat of the same slide. The state superintendent, he or she is looking at how it affects the districts around, the division of funds, the interests of schools in the area, and the best interests and welfare of the students. So the state superintendent's using a similar criteria. He has the added peace of mind, and he would also have a transcript. We answered this question a little bit earlier. It has to be approved by a simple majority in each of the districts that are affected. So 2 or 7 or however many districts are looking to combine each district. So again, back to local control. The final step after the administrators have jumped through all the hoops and looked at all the stuff and had their opinion, the final then rests with the public and their vote. So typically, this isn't part of the law, but what typically happens then is once, if the state superintendent approves it, then there's some time, usually that committee of 10 or the petitioners have set it for a ballot that's far enough out that they have time to explain to the community. There's almost a referendum-like campaign, where people who have worked hard on the petitions then explain it to the voters before the voters take action. And typically you're going to guess what those questions are like. What's my new tax rate going to be like? Is my student going to be shipped across town? Is it, it's going to be those kinds of questions. The law is very clear that the existing school boards would be eliminated, and there's a new school board that's elected then. And those can be, the same people can run again, but it's a new election. Now, an interesting nuance in the law is that that committee of 10 can have the board member election at the same election as the question on the referendum. It's listed as May. So whether that's a good idea or not, I don't know. But you'll have a new configuration of school board. Now, school boards are the ones who contract with, usually, school boards are the ones that contract with the administrators. So somewhere in there that's not laid out in the law. It could very well be that the new board wants to maintain some of the administration or combining the administration, hiring new administration. Maybe there's an interim time period. It might depend on what time of the year. There's almost always some kind of plan. Let's say, for instance, that we wanted to do this vote in November. Well, we probably would put in our petition that this would take place the following summer. Right? We're not going to uproot kids and move them all over the place in November. We probably would take the spring to plan and make sure that we can open school. All of those decisions that are made after the new board is elected, and they would then decide what they're going to do with administrators. In many cases, I know of 2 or 3 where districts consolidated and the superintendent of one stayed superintendent, the superintendent of the other became assistant superintendent for operations. So the 2 of them worked together during that transition period. That's not required, but there's something like that, because I think it's in everybody's best interest to make that transition as smooth as we can for our families and for our students. So in my mind, the average time for this process is about 2 years. And the caveat I'll say to that is that in the past decade or so, the consolidations have almost all the ones that I know of, let's say, have been by necessity. The 2 districts that they see themselves slowly disappearing out in rural Illinois, and it's like, we can't survive on our own, we can't make payroll, we've got to find a way to come together. And so they worked collaboratively, and so things worked pretty quickly. There was sort of a sense of desperation, but all of that work of building the petition and so forth typically was about 2 years. Yes, sir.
From the time that the petitioners are created, the documents that's going to go to your office and then eventually to the state superintendent, how much time does that have to be in your hands or the state superintendent first before the election time? Let's say we're shooting for this November.
Sure.
Which is ridiculous because we're 6 weeks away. What would be the timeline? What's the process? Are there rules for that?
So, from the moment the petition hits me, I've got 2 weeks, I've got 3 weeks. If I get it in the newspaper right away, it's 3 weeks to the hearing, and then after the hearing, I have 2 weeks to make a decision. So that's 5 minimum. The state superintendent then has 3, is 8. So the minimum would be 8 weeks from handing it to me to state superintendent's decision. And then the petition, part of the petition requirements are that you project forward to when you would like to have it elected, on the election, on the ballot. Thank you. So you could say, if they handed me the petition the 1st of November, they could be putting it on the ballot in the primary election in March. It's a regular election, it's not a special election. So it could be that you target a date when that's going to be. And as I said, most that I know have built in a little bit of space so that there's some time to explain to the community what's happening, what they're voting for. Yes, sir.
Concerning approval and denial between regional
Yes.
and state, whatever research I've done, I found that one advantage is consolidation or unification of curriculum, because then all the kids are more focused on one curriculum because we're preparing them for high school that they'd be going to. But in your experience, or from what you've seen in other consolidations or heard, what is a disadvantage a possible disadvantage to education from consolidation?
I think it's a great question. I don't know that I would identify a disadvantage. And so you're kind of asking me what's the harm question, right?
Yeah. But what would you see in a petition that would tell you, oh, this is going to harm kids' education?
Right. I don't know.
Dependent on other parts of the petition?
Yeah. In most cases, you know, the flip side of that coin is what are the advantages of keeping things the way they are? And that's back to local control. That a community has chosen a certain leadership, and that leadership has chosen a curriculum that matches students well. You know, I often talk, our region is pretty huge, and we have places like Cicero, where 85% of my students speak Spanish as another language. When I go down there and tell them that there are schools up here that teach Italian, they think I'm from another country. You know? That's the story of local control. And so I think that oftentimes people view that as a real value, that locally we get to decide what's best for our kids. You know, I think one example that a friend shared with me is he wrote in his review that he was disturbed by the fact the petition was going to raise the class size for elementary kids. And so part of their petition was they were going to raise class size from 22 to 28 or something like that he thought was a disadvantage for elementary students. And that was part of their package on how they were going to budget and save some money by consolidating together. So in his mind, that was a problem. I think that's kind of the example you're thinking of. Right. To your other point, though, see, I have this rhythm where I always give two answers, right? To your other question, I think that Cook County is unique in the sense that we have so many elementary separate from high school. A lot of other areas, DuPage, Lake, most of the districts are unit districts, K-12. The way that I see that addressed in this region is the superintendents work closely together. Like this area, the Leiden Area Superintendents Organization, I actually meet with them once a month and we talk about what curriculum are you using, what are you using, because we want to know that in this case, you know, nearby here, we want to make sure that kids going to Ridgewood are all prepared, right? So we do that through articulation, not necessarily through structure. And I think that's a good challenge to our superintendents to say, we want to make sure that our kids are just as prepared. But the concept you're asking is a key one. How do we make sure that all kids are getting equal opportunities as they're preparing for high school and the step beyond? So great question. Did I kind of answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.